Welcome back to BBN After Dark. We have once again another episode where there are no games to talk about. It seems like once again we've gotten really unlucky with the rain, but excited to get a chance to talk about some players today that we don't normally get to talk about. Obviously, BBN and BBN After Dark is very centered around the superstars and the award winners and the top prospects, and I think rightfully so because obviously those guys are the ones making all the headlines, but today we're going to get a chance to talk about some of the players who are role players and more of the lower end starters and maybe some low end prospects and rookies that we don't get to talk about a lot. But the players we picked today, we went through every single age and picked about 3 players from each age. And I think each of these players has star to superstar trajectory. They're on that kind of level in their career. So I'm excited to get a chance to talk to these guys or talk about these guys. And let's go ahead and start with 11U. And the first player I want to bring up is a guy who I think all three of us, KJ and Bernie and myself, all agree this guy's got a very high ceiling. And I think the question is, can he put it all together? And can he put it together on defense as well? And it's Dominic Ahern, who we've talked about a little bit. But I think when we've talked about 11U so far this season, it's been about Owen Dobrinsky and Lucas Kloster and the two good rookies. But I do want to talk about Dominic Ahern here. And KJ, this is a guy who I know you like a lot. And I think we've seen flashes from him where he's looked like the best hitter on the team, and then we've seen flashes where he looks like he's never played baseball before. He's been kind of hit or miss in that aspect. But KJ, what do you think about Dominic Ahern and how you think he's developed in the past 3 or 4 months? And what do you think about him potentially in the next 2 years? Where do you think he'll be at in his baseball development?
Yeah, here's a guy, he's a bear kind of hitter. Um, and he hasn't fully bought in, but I think the hardest part usually, especially when they're younger, is getting him to swing at full intensity, and that's something that Dominic doesn't have a problem with. So he's already ahead in that part of his development now. Keeping his head down and making consistent hard contact is something that he struggled with. But I think the first step of swinging hard, keeping your head down is way easier than swinging hard. To learn for a younger guy. So, um, I'm excited for how he's going to develop, and also he has some value in what he can do at catcher. I know that team's going to have some innings back there. So, if you get a catcher who can, be a big bat, typically we find, some guys have defensive only catchers, but 11 you could have a catcher who's hitting in the middle of the order. So I think once he can put it all together, make consistent hard contact, this guy's going to be a superstar on that team.
Yeah, and I was gonna ask KJ, I think I've said before the rarest thing in baseball is a catcher who can hit, and Dominic Ahern is definitely a catcher who can hit. The question is how good is he defensively back there? At 11U it doesn't necessarily matter too much as long as you're catching the ball, but as he gets older, he's gonna have to develop back there. So KJ, do you see him as a catcher long term, or could you see him getting flexed out maybe to second base or to the outfield? What do you think is his defensive, kind of position long term in his career?
Yeah, I definitely think he's a hitter first player, and his bat is going to find him a position. And I would say, maybe it is first base, but I think you kind of want a mentality in your youth catchers. You got to have a little bit of a crazy kind of mentality, and he's kind of got that mentality. He's definitely not scared of the ball, so he's kind of got that mentality, and that's kind of hard to find sometimes at that young of an age. So he's got the mentality to be a catcher. So if that's something he wants to do, I think it definitely won't hurt the team if he's back there.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's a very serviceable 11U catcher. As he gets older, we'll see if he develops defensively. Because I could definitely see him getting flexed out maybe to first or second base or maybe even the outfield because I think you're going to want to keep that bat in the lineup no matter what. Let's go ahead and move on to our next player here, Whedon Hainline, who has been a guy we've touched on a little bit before. I think a lot of people know him more for his pitching. He's very ahead of the curve in terms of 11U is one of those ages where it's hard to find strike throwers. Whedon Hainline is a strike thrower for sure, but I want to talk about his bat a little bit. This guy is a guy who is hits for more power than his size. He's a guy who's worked really hard and a guy who's put together a very nice offensive season so far. But Bernie, I wanted to go ahead and give you a chance to touch on this guy. You can talk about his pitching or his hitting or both. But what do you think about Whedon Hainline, both where he is right now and where you see him being in the next year or two?
Yeah, so I'll start with the pitching. That's what he's more known for. But I mean, so far this fall, he leads his team in innings pitched. He walks basically nobody. Has lowest ERA of anybody who's thrown more than an inning. So he's been their best pitcher, I think, thus far. And I think with just Whedon, he's up there throwing strikes. He has good mechanics, right? He's one of those guys that since he's came in, he's really bought in. I think he works really hard. He's one of those guys a year or two out that you're just hoping falls in love with the gym because, I mean, if he could turn his velo up, I mean, he could be a lethal left-handed pitcher for that team. He could be the ace of that squad for a long time. And with the bat, like you said, he's worked really hard on that as well. I know that at points in his fall so far, he's batted in the heart of the order, like around guys like Ahern and Closter and Dobrinsky. I at least for a game or two, he was in the 3 hole for Mac's team. So, I think the upside's definitely there. I think Mac, he definitely has the faith of Mac in him. So, yeah, excited to see what Whedon brings next couple of years.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, Bernie, where when you have a team that you're still trying to find your pieces, you're just going to default to the hard workers, and I think Whedon kind of got thrown into that 3 hole before he was really ready for it, but it's because Mac believes in hard work, and Whedon's definitely shown that. Bernie, is there a player, or maybe not, it doesn't have to be a player, but maybe a type of production you could see from Whedon 2 years from now? What do you think type of hitting production Whedon's going to produce?
Type of hitting production? Just from what I'm seeing from Whedon right now, it looks like I haven't seen him take many at bats, but by stats, he has a good eye up there. So I think that he could be a player that, he's not gonna hit for a crazy. He's not gonna hit for like Land Nickerson type power, but there's some power mixed in there. Um, I think he gets on base side a high average. I think you're looking at like maybe a 450 average, 550 on base with a decent amount of doubles to add to that squad. I'm trying to think of a good player comparison right now.
Yeah, I was thinking
Like
more doubles power than homer power, but yeah, do you have a player comparison, Bernie?
I'm thinking like I don't know, man, it's tough.
I mean, I could almost see a Brody Wilburn type.
Yeah, I can see it.
I guess he'll walk more than Brody Wilburn as well, but I think low strikeout rate, doubles power. I could see that type of player from Wheaton Hainline in the next year or two. Another player who I think is a doubles power type of guy is Ben Bonchek. This is a guy who I know Mac likes a lot because of his attitude. He's another one of those players that doesn't fear the ball, doesn't fear, going up there against hard throwing pitchers, and he just goes up there and he competes. I don't know if we've told this story on the show before, but Mac has told me this story multiple times where Ben was in there against a hard thrower. He gets hit by pitch and everybody kind of stops and is like, "Oh, Ben, are you okay?" And he's like, "I want to get back up there." It was in practice, and he gets hit by pitch, and he wanted to get back up there for another at bat. And I think that kind of mentality has served him well, and we've seen him hit some bombs, and we've seen him struggle. He's kind of like Dominic Ahern, where we've seen both sides of the coin for Ben Bonchek, and it's just about finding that consistency. But I like good attitude and I like hard work. And I think Ben Bonchek has shown both of those things. And I think he could be a very, very good player at this age. I think in the next year or two, we could see Ben Bonchek. I know he's hit leadoff at times for this team. But I could see him being one of the 2 or 3 best hitters on this team going forward. He's another guy where I think you got to find a position for him still. Um, I think he's going to find somewhere in the corner outfield, but I think that option's still open for where he can move around the field. He is athletic. I don't know if he's necessarily a great defender, but he is athletic to where if you give him a winner, I think you could train him to be your second baseman, or even, a catcher or even a first baseman. So I think the door's open for Ben Bonchek there. But let's go ahead and move on to 12U. Obviously, Bernie, this is your age, and we got a couple players here. And I want to go ahead and start with Parker Cates, who I think is a player who he looks the part, and I think that's a big thing where he's got good size, good body. He's very, he looks like he knows what he's doing behind the plate, and he's putting the work in. And KJ, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about Parker Cates here, who's a guy who I think has, you know, I think the easiest way to describe Parker Case is when he wants to, he can do it all, when he wants to. I think sometimes, and this is just the case with a lot of young players, sometimes he can have moments where he's not necessarily completely focused. Sometimes he can have moments where he is kind of goofing off. But I think when he is 100% focused, he can really do anything. KJ, what do you think about Parker Cates, especially on the hitting side? How do you think he is right now, and how do you think he could develop over the next 12 months?
Yeah, like you said, when things are great, Parker's great. But when things are bad, Parker's not so great. But I know for me, I've definitely seen the biggest thing I've seen from Parker, and I watch him in free swing a lot, is he's getting much more consistent. Sometimes he'd slack off a little bit all night, and then he'd run into a good number, and then he'd start swinging hard and trying to get that number. But lately he's coming in there right away with the intention to break his record every single swing. And you can kind of see it happening in the games. He's putting up better numbers in the games because of it. And again, you get a catcher who can hit. And Parker definitely passes the eye test, but for someone who's so young, he definitely has a really good work ethic, and like him or not, that it's you have to respect the work he puts in.
Yeah, and I think that word consistency is a word that's going to come up a lot in the show just because of the pool of players we're talking about today. A lot of these guys have shown, star potential, and it's just about finding that consistency. And I think for Parker Cates, it's not a consistent issue of production. It's a consistent issue of focus. I've seen him catch on days and he looks unbelievable back there. And then I've seen him catch on days and he looks, like an amateur back there. And Bernie, I know, we each kind of had our own player we're going to talk about, but I did want to give you a chance to talk about Parker Cates as well. Just talk about the inconsistencies you've seen from Parker. But I do think the ceiling's definitely high. So Bernie, give me your thoughts on what Parker is right now and what do you think he could be in the next 12 months?
I mean, yeah, a year ago with Parker, I mean, people don't realize that a year ago Parker was on our second team, 12U or 11U Myers at the time, and could not barely catch a ball behind home plate. So a player with his work ethic and see this is how far he's come in the past year. It's been amazing to watch. I mean, I think going into this year, everyone was expecting Brody Wilburn to eat, almost every inning behind the plate. I mean, he was going to be the workhorse back there. That was the game plan. But Brody's so useful everywhere else, and Parker, he came far enough along to where he's been great back there. At least, I mean, he's been very good back there for me so far. So he's allowed me to use Brody in different places. But yeah, I mean, you just look at a player that's gone that far in 1 year with his work ethic. It's just like, where could this guy be in 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, I think he could be a top player. Again, he looks the part. I really like the attitude he has most of the time. It's just, and again, it's one of those things where he's a young player. I think he'll those little maturity things or lack of focus things. I think he'll grow out of very quickly because the work ethic's already there, and I think eventually he's going to get to a point where he really, really wants this badly, and I think he wants it badly now. But I think he's going to get to a point where this becomes his life and he's going to be a top player. Maybe that's next year, maybe it's 2 years from now, but I think Parker Cates will be a big player in the Bears organization. Let's go ahead and move on to his catching duo partner and Brody Wilburn. I think if you want to talk about Brody Wilburn, I think it's the exact same thing we were talking about with Lucas Wilburn 2 years ago. And if you don't know Lucas Wilburn's story, obviously Lucas Wilburn's an MVP candidate right now. He's arguably the best player at his age, just dominating, doing it all, hitting, pitching, defense. It doesn't matter, doing everything right. 2 years ago, Lucas Wilburn was on the bench for the top team, ended up getting sent down to the second level team, grinded his way for about a year, came back up, and now he's where he is. And I think Brody Wilburn is in a very similar position, although I don't think it's going to take him getting sent down for him to figure it out. But Brody Wilburn is a guy who's got a lot of power, but sometimes he does not go up there to hit for power. He goes up there to just put the ball in play. And I think it's the exact same problem Lucas Wilburn has. And I think Lucas already going through this, going through the having to get sent down and grind through the second level team and figure everything out. I think him already going through that and being his brother, I think Brody Wilburn can come out of this a lot quicker than Lucas did. And I think we can see Brody being a best player on the team type player, very quickly, maybe even next year, maybe even into the fall. He could be, that type of player on his team. But I think the thing about Brody is he's already got the power in him. We were talking about some other guys like Whedon Hainline, who he needs to hit the gym before he's got the power, right? Brody's already got the power, so we just got to get it out of him, and I think that is definitely there in the cards for Brody. But Bernie, I did want to give you a chance to talk about him defensively. I think Brody, it's nice that you can put him basically anywhere and he's very solid. But what have you seen from him specifically at the catcher position this season?
And yeah, Brody's been very good back there for me as well, along with Parker. But I think right now we're trying to get past that point of picking the ball behind home plate. It's been a big mental block for Brody so far. Just get him in that, get him in the rhythm of getting down and blocking the ball. He already has the arm. I mean, he can throw. I mean, not too many guys steal third base off Brody, and teams will still steal second, but he has the arm to throw some guys out at second. So I mean, the arm's there. He has a very good arm for 12U. It's just behind the plate. I mean, he's very good at receiving the ball. It's just for me, it's just getting past that mental block with him and Parker of getting down and blocking.
Let's talk about Rudy Montenegro Langley, who, when we did our top 50 prospects list, either he was on it and was ranked very low, or he might not even have been ranked at all. But I would say in the last couple weeks since we did that list, he's a guy who mentally has kind of shot up both me and Bernie's kind of own prospect lists internally. As we've seen the more I've seen of this guy, the more I like him. And he's big and strong. I think I like him defensively. I know he still looks a little rough around the edges and he makes some mistakes, but I actually like, for example, if you want a specific example, I like the way he gets the ball out in four corners. One of the biggest things I see in players is during four corners, when I'm yelling at them and I'm trying to get them to go quicker, how do they respond to that? Some players, they hear that and they crumble. Some players, they hear that and they don't change anything. Rudy heard that and he started going quicker. He started getting that ball out, and I really like the way he got the ball out in four corners. And that's a small thing that I like where he's trending in that direction. And I like where he's trending with the bat as well. But Bernie, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about Rudy Montenegro Langley. Where does he kind of rank of all the rookies at your age right now? I feel like he's kind of gone up toward that list. And where do you see him in maybe 12 months from now? Where do you see him being in terms of this team?
Yeah, like you were kind of touching on a little bit, the mentality's there. I think on our prospect list, I think I could be wrong here. I think he was low 20s, high 30s. That was just because we hadn't seen too much of him yet. Games rained out the first weekend. I believe he was on vacation the first week of practice already. Like he already had it planned out before he joined the Bears. But like you said, the more I see this guy, the more I like him. His bat is definitely. I think he's comparable to Trey in a way, my other rookie. That was ranked the number 3 prospect, I believe. Maybe a little less polished version, but both of those guys are big lefty bats who have massive power. And as we get into now, the first month it's our kind of our first look at rookies, and our second month now, I want to see how these guys work. And Rudy's now in free swing this month. So with the bat, the power is definitely there. The mentality's there. I think the work ethic is starting to come into its own. I think he's getting more confident. And every time I see this guy, he gets better and better.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Rudy, and I'm very excited to see where the kind of hard work is going to take him over the rest of the fall and also the winter. Let's go ahead and move on to 13U, and I want to start with a rookie who I believe either he hadn't joined the Bears by the time our top 50 prospects list, or he was out of town, so we hadn't seen him. But a guy who definitely would have been on the top 50 prospects if we would have known him. But it's Owen Wilbrecht, and KJ, you can correct me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Owen Wilbrecht, I believe. This is a guy who I like a lot. I love the work ethic of his first 2 practices, but other than seeing him in practice, I haven't really got a chance to watch this guy. So KJ, I'm gonna let you have the floor here for Owen Wilbrecht.
Yeah, Owen Wilbrecht. This is a guy he's just an athlete. He's not necessarily a great baseball player yet, but he's got a ton of tools. He's an athlete. He's fast. And what he offered us, when he walked in, is he is not afraid to lay out, not afraid to put his body on the line, and he's a very, very good outfielder. And it's something that we needed on the top team. And he's flying around, making the routine catches, but also making catches he shouldn't make. Just being a great athlete. Now, the bat definitely needs time. It definitely needs time. But the guy's an athlete, He feels like a really quick learner. He had no trouble hanging around with the top level guys during practice. So I think this is a guy who's going to earn at bats because he's so good defensively, and he'll have a chance to keep him if he keeps putting up good at bats. But he's going to be in the lineup just for what he gives you in center field.
Yeah, that's another one of those things where in practice, I said with Rudy, I want to see how people respond when I'm telling them to go faster in four corners. With new outfielders, I want to see how they respond when I'm yelling at them to lay out. Listen, I know laying out sucks, laying out and having to put your body on the line to go get a ball. It's not fun, but the guys who are willing to do that shows me a lot. And Owen, his very first practice was flying around the Bud Dome making diving plays. And I learned a lot from that practice. I like this kid a lot. And, I would say of the things that the Bears are good at developing, hitting's probably the number one, and I think if a guy comes in and he's got everything else, he's athletic, he's fast, he's a good outfielder. If he's got all of those, I think the bat is going to come, I think you give this kid a full winner, and I think you're looking at a guy who potentially could be vying for a top 6 spot in the order. I think his ceiling maybe this is crazy, but I think his ceiling is probably around ZZ Garcia, a guy who is going to hit near 500, who's going to hit doubles power, and is going to play great defense. I could see that being the potential ceiling. This guy's a great kid, and I think if he puts in a similar work ethic to ZZ Garcia, I could definitely see him kind of hitting that ceiling. The next guy I want to talk about, another rookie here, is Inish Walsh, and this is a guy who's impressed me. He's been playing with that Kreitler squad, and I've seen him field several hard hit balls. My team, 14 Floyd, was playing up against Kreitler, and one of my guys smoked the ball. I think it might have been Logan Payne, smoked the ball at third base where Ennis was playing, and he caught it no problem. I mean, he looked like he wasn't even phased. This ball was hit at least 85 miles an hour, and he looked like he'd been catching this kind of line drive his whole life. This guy, I haven't seen him take very many at bats. I've seen him. I know one at bat I did see him take. He was a little passive, but that's one of those things that, a lot of new guys come in passive, and I think we can get that out of him. But KJ, I did want to get you a chance to talk about Ennis a little bit. What do you see from him from the offensive side? Where do you see him kind of developing as a hitter?
Just like Owen, this guy is an athlete. And I think he's shown he's willing to work. I think right after he committed to joining the Bears, he jumped in free swing. I've seen him multiple times there. And so if this guy's willing to work, he's already such a good athlete. I think he could be a top level kind of player. And like you said, this guy's making plays at third base. And he told me he's never even played third before. So he's a guy who's just an athlete, can play everywhere around the field, really. And with the bat again, he's in kind of the same boat as Owen Weibrecht. The bat needs to has a little bit to come along, but if this guy's gonna buy in, he's bought in defensively, and I've seen him take big strides in only the little time I've had with him. Swinging harder, keeping two hands on the bat, keeping the head down, and contact isn't a problem for Ennis. He's gonna make contact, but we want to make hard contact. So I think just getting him to make more hard contact, swinging more viciously, is going to be the big thing for Ennis to jumpstart his top team career.
Yeah, but Owen and Ennis, two very nice athletic bodies that, I think, again, we're good at developing hitting, and I think I could see both those guys being top team contributors in the next year. Let's go ahead and talk about a guy who's been here a long time, Josh Tyler, who, if you go back in the day, a couple years ago when he was a rookie, or maybe it was in the second year, he was one of the top prospects in the Bears at the time. And I remember he broke his arm and it kind of derailed his sophomore season. And then, he comes back and he's not 100% right. And he's kind of been, he's had an interesting path to his career. I think he kind of shifted to the pitching side, and that's kind of where everybody knows him now as a big pitcher. But I would say he's had a sneakily very good hitting season so far this season. And again, he's a guy who, as 13U Floyd has been looking for a guy to step up, I feel like he's taken some really good at bats, so far over the last couple months. But Bernie, give me your thoughts on Josh Tyler, the hitter. We've talked about him a lot as a pitcher, but what do you think about Josh Tyler currently, him as a hitter, and where do you think he could be next spring as a hitter?
Yeah, Josh definitely more well known for his pitching, but at least so far this fall, he's top 5 on that team in batting average and on base. So I think that speaks to the step he's taken forward so far. You know, he's I mean, uh, he's more consistent this fall, I'll say. There'd be some at bats like in the summer or in years past where he'd go up there and you're like, this kid looks like he's never played baseball before. But then there's be at bats where he takes a very, 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 very good at bat. He comes through in a big spot. Championship game, we will walk off hit. He comes through in these massive spots. But now it seems like he's getting more consistent. He's doing it again and again, week in and week out. And in a year, it's hard to make another player comparison, but I think he's kind of on that same trajectory. I know I'm going backwards here in age, but like Whedon, you talk about how Whedon could be Josh in a couple of years. Now, what's the next step up for Josh? I don't know what that answer is, but that same path as a hitter like that.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where we kind of had a running joke where it was like the bigger the moment, the better Josh is. If it's a soft throwing pitcher in a 10-0 game, Josh is not getting a hit in that spot. But against a big arm, a hard thrower, where a spot where you think Josh wouldn't succeed, that's when he gets the big hit. And I think at least from the at bats I've seen this fall, it seems like he's been a lot more consistent just in terms of the at bats he's been taking. He's still a little bit more passive than I'd like him to be. And it's one of those things like, for example, Landon Meyer is sometimes a little bit more passive than I want him to be because his eye's so good. And I think Josh is kind of in that same boat where his eye's so good that I believe the pitches he's taking are probably big league balls, right? They're probably outside of the big league strike zone. But in youth, that's just not how it is. So he'll take these pitches that are 2 or 3 inches off the plate that are getting called strikes that I think Josh could swing at and hit them hard. And I think that's kind of the next step for him, where if he could really buy into being aggressive and trusting himself to hit those pitches that are just off the plate, I think you could see him being a top 6, 7 hitter on this team going forward. Let's go ahead and move on to 14U, starting with a guy who I would say last year we talked about this guy a ton. This year we haven't talked about him so much. He's been a guy who's been streaky. He's been a guy who's been defensive minded, I would say a little bit, but a guy who's at least lately been starting to find his swing a lot more, and that's Aaron Noll. And Bernie, I know you're the biggest Aaron Noll fan, probably in the Bears, and I this coming from a guy who loves him a lot in me. But I think you kind of have always been on this guy's bandwagon, and he's been a guy who we needed a center fielder. He's played an amazing center field all year long, and it's kind of him being so good in center field has kind of kept him in the lineup, even when he's kind of struggled at the plate. So, Bernie, what do you think about Aaron Noll? It seems like he's kind of turned a corner where he's back to really being a consistent hitter at the plate. But what do you think about Aaron Noll so far this year?
Yeah, player I've always liked. Like you said, I think the key with him is just consistency. So far this fall, I think he's second on team in OPS. He has a home run, a couple extra base hits. I think the only guys behind in OPS is Brennan Bass, who I think is a well-known, in the MVP race. Defensively, he's always been great. I think he can go get balls that simply no one else could even reach or even get to. But with the bat, looks like he's starting to find his consistency. The power's there. We've seen the power in the past. It's just not being more consistent with that power.
Yeah, he's been a player all year who has gone on streaks of hitting great and then not hitting so much. And I think so far this fall, he's been great. I mean, he's taken great at bats. I remember he came up. So we had the 2 weeks off at the end of the summer, and then he was on vacation. He comes up his first at bat after vacation. The first pitch he sees in about a month, he hits it over the fence. And I thought that was a great moment. And I think since that at bat, he's been taking great at bats. He's been crushing the baseball, and he's a guy who, again, even when he's not necessarily hitting great, you want to give him at bats because of how good he is defensively and just how high his ceiling is. So if he's producing, right, there's going to be no playing time concerns for him. I'm very excited to see what he can do the rest of the fall. And as this 14U Floyd roster gets even more competitive with Jack Kester joining the team, with Braden Miller joining the team, Joey Burgess, these guys all coming in, as the lineup gets more competitive, Aaron's going to have to hit even more to stay in the lineup. And it seems like he's really stepped his game up. Let's talk about Logan Payne, who is a guy who I would say has kind of been the odd man out a lot of the season in terms of getting in the starting lineup, for that 14 Floyd squad. And I think a big reason is he doesn't necessarily have a defensive position. He's a solid outfielder. He's a solid second baseman. But there's just guys who are better defensively, and for him, he's really got to out hit those guys by a lot to kind of break into the order. But I will say, if you look at his season numbers, he's been very, very solid all year long offensively. For me, I'd like to see him hit for a little bit more power in games. I think he's got one of the most power, raw power, one of the most on the team. So I'd like to see him kind of unleash that. But KJ, what are your thoughts on Logan Payne in terms of, right now he's kind of fighting for a lineup spot? How do you think he kind of breaks into that lineup? And where do you think you could see him being in the next 12 months?
Yeah, Logan's a guy who's got his path to breaking in is going to be through his bat. He's not a guy who's so good defensively that you have to put his bat in there. He's a guy who's going to get in. That you're going to have to find a spot because of his bat. And the way he's developed, I think, he's a guy in free swing who's consistently hitting the ball in the mid 80s. And at that age, he's pretty legit. And it goes to show how deep that team is. That he's not an everyday type player, but don't get it twisted. This guy is a middle of the order level bat. But like you said, he's not great in the outfield. He can get a little bit, we don't like to use this term too much, but a little overly aggressive, And when I say that, he swings at some breaking balls. He'll swing at some absolutely wild pitches. But the good part of that, you never have to worry about him not swinging. And a guy in his role, you're not gonna get a starting job by walking. So he's up there, and I know I don't see him take much live at bats, but I know in free swing, and I even saw in the BWL this past winter. He's going up there swinging for the fences. He's going up there swinging violently. And we talked about some guys even earlier in the show, who are making consistent contact, but it's soft contact. They're not going up swinging violently. And Logan's a guy who's going up there swinging violently, and he won't make as much contact as those other guys, but he's going up there swinging violently, swinging for the fences. And, I think that type of player is easier to work with. And so, and you give this guy another 12 months. I mean, he's already got, a very athletic body. He's very, very strong. So you give this guy a whole nother 12 months. And, in the next 12 months, he'll be over 90 miles an hour hitting. And I think in 12 months, you're going to have a really, really, really tough decision to make, not putting this guy in your order.
Yeah, and KJ, like you said, it's really the breaking balls where he's chasing breaking balls in the dirt, and he's such an amazing fastball hitter that when he does that, pitchers just keep throwing him breaking balls. But I did want to ask you here, KJ. I would say in the last 2 months or so, the big thing for Logan has been he's hitting these 87-mile-an-hour singles, just either a ground ball through the left side or line drive right in front of the outfielder. In free swing, when you say he's hitting those consistent 85s, is that kind of what you're saying, where it's those, line drive singles, or is he hitting for more power in the cage than he's necessarily shown in the game?
No, in the cage it is line drives and hard ground balls. And, when he's missing it, it's gonna be, a soft ground ball. And that is all just from, moving his head a little bit at the end of the at bat. He's moving his head so little, he's not swinging and missing. Maybe when he is swinging and missing, he is moving his head. But when he hits it, he's still hitting it so hard, but he's still moving that head a little bit, and that's taking him a little bit on top of the ball, so he's not getting under, he's not getting lift on it. So that's the thing we definitely worked on. Sometimes you see Logan and he'll swing him, and his head is going everywhere, and that's Logan's big thing. That's the only thing separating. But take that into account. He's not getting all these balls that he's hitting them 85, 86. So you can imagine when this guy fully 100% keeping his head down, he's going to have some absolute balls that are crushed. And, I saw a couple in BWL, him absolutely crush some balls. I think it's an easy fix. It's a fix that will get made in the next 12 months. But, with all that taken in, he's this good and he's not even getting all the ball.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that 11 different guys on 14 Floyd have home runs, and Logan Payne isn't one of them, despite probably having the third, fourth, or fifth most power on the team. I think that's where he's got to kind of translate that power into game power. And I think when he does that, he's going to be a guy that never leaves the lineup. But let's go ahead and move on to the next guy here, and that's Lucas Velchek, who, again, kind of like Josh, known for his arm. When we've talked about him on BBN and BBN After Dark, it's been for his pitching, but he's very quietly put up a very nice offensive season. This is a guy who right now is 5th on this team in OPS. And you talk about how stacked this roster is. Here are the guys above him. And really, he's 4th because, Jack Kester is technically above him, but he's only got 12 at bats. So the only guys above him with, 100 plate appearances are Lucas Wilburn, Brendan Bass, Landon Meyer, who are arguably three of the best players in the Bears, and he's next, So I think he's kind of been overshadowed, or maybe not even overshadowed. He's just kind of been quietly this great hitter all season long. And it's been very impressive to kind of see a guy who we knew could be a great hitter. His strikeout rate is down. His power is up. And I think it's been very impressive to see what he's done all season long, because it's kind of gone under the radar for how good Lucas Velchek has been offensively. Let's go ahead and move on to 15U, starting with Weston Brody. This is a guy who has been kind of a role player for that top team all year long, but a guy who I know Rob has really started to like a lot. I know KJ's liked him all year long, a guy who's good defensively and has really started to put up good offensive numbers. Bernie, what do you think about Weston Brody, what you've seen from him so far this season, and what do you think the ceiling is for Weston Brody over the next 12 months?
Yeah, this is a player that I think as a group we've all liked since joining the Bears. I think his work ethic is one of the best we have around here. He comes in every day ready to work. He's a consistent free swing guy. And he's put up a very good season. He's been in that role, like a role player type guy all season. He hasn't complained about it. He's taken his job in stride. He's had some big moments this year. I know he had that home run earlier in the season. And looking ahead next 12 months, I was just looking at some stats here just see if I could get a couple names out here. And I think he's a similar type hitter, maybe like Tyvor at 16U, or maybe even like a Rose Selby type at 18U. And both those guys are like, I think Ty's like the 3 or 4 hitter on Dalton, and Rose is the leadoff hitter on 18U. So those guys are, very, very impact players for those teams. And I think that, Weston keeps working this hard, he could be that in a couple of years.
Yeah, and I would say similar to those two guys, Ty is so good defensively that it wouldn't matter if he didn't hit that well, he'd still play, right? And I think Weston kind of has that same thing where Weston's a very good defender. He can play second, short, third, outfield, doesn't matter. And he's going to make all the easy plays and even make some very tough plays. And if his bat can just ride along with that, that's how you go from being a role player to a real star. But yeah, I like this kid a lot. I think everybody, just his personality, I think everybody who knows Wes likes him a lot. And I think he's a very good player on a very good team. It's just about who's he going to beat out, whose job is he going to take? And I think that's kind of been the stopping block for Wes so far. Another guy I want to talk about is a guy that the more I see him, the more I like him, and it's Braden Colburn. Very similar to Rudy. Every week I like this guy a little bit more. And I think if we did the prospect list today, he'd be way higher than he was in the initial list because his work ethic is very nice. His defense is very, very good. And his bat is very, very solid, and he's a guy who I think has a very high ceiling. He's a guy who's very unassuming, he doesn't look like he'd be necessarily a superstar, but he plays very, very smooth. I don't know how long this guy's been playing tournament baseball, but he looks, just very established and very solid. And he's a guy who I think if he buys into the gym, I could see him being a superstar, in the next 12 to 24 months. I think that's kind of the next step for him is he really has to get bigger and stronger. And I could see this guy being great. But I really like Braden Colburn. I'm excited to see what he's going to do over the next 12 months. But the last guy here, another rookie, is Jude Ramirez, who, again, was not on that top 50 prospect list, just because we were still getting to know all the new guys. And if we made that list today, he'd probably be inside the top 25 at least. But this guy who's big, tall, strong, good defensively, and a guy I like a lot. But KJ, I think you've kind of seen more of his bat than I have. I run the defensive side of practice. You obviously see him in free swing. What do you think about Jude Ramirez and the ceiling for him going forward?
Yeah, if you've seen Jude, he's got a big, tall, lanky body. And I think, the big things we've worked on in free swing with him is just getting the most out of that big frame. I think when he came in, he's swinging soft and he wasn't even, making contact necessarily. But, and then the next week he came in, he's making contact, but it's not hard contact. And the next week he came in and he's swinging hard, but he's missing some balls. And so, he's made developments each week. And, here's a guy he's already hitting in the, 80s right now. I think this guy definitely gets to 90 in the next, say 3 months. I haven't really seen him get all of a baseball yet. And he's got, that big frame. He hits the ball hard. He's a really good athlete. And I think this guy could be a superstar in the future. I know Rob likes him a lot. He's been, him and Lucas Colson have been really taking the extra step to get more involved in free swing and getting in the approach. And, when they get there on Fridays, they're there till, they're there when I get there and they're there when I leave, so they're willing to put in the work. And, he's already a pretty talented player. And I think you give this guy a winner to, put some meat on that long, lanky body. This guy's going to be a really good player.
Yeah, I like this guy a lot. He's continued to impress me week after week, and I'm very excited to see what his kind of trajectory takes in the next year. Let's move on to 16U, and this is kind of an interesting conversation here because we've got three guys who are veterans, three guys who've been in the Bears for a little while. I think these are guys who have all kind of taken different paths in their career. And I wanted to go ahead and start with Tyler Hall, who's a guy who's been in the Bears for a long time. Crazy enough, I think he's kind of just now getting recognition for being a very good player, but he's been in the Bears a long time. I mean, 4 or 5 years he's been here, and he's really starting to come into his own on this Top Dalton team. Obviously, we know him for his pitching, but I think he's started to kind of develop as a hitter. He's been experimenting at leadoff at times this season. He's been in the middle of the order, and he's put together a very solid offensive season. So, KJ, I think we all know what Tyler Hall is as a pitcher. But what do you think about Tyler Hall as a hitter? What do you think about what he's doing this year, and where do you think he could be over the course of the winter?
Yeah, Tyler, I know just jumped back in free swing, and we've been working a little bit together. I think Tyler's big thing is always going to be pitching. He's at that point of his career where his big thing is always going to be pitching. But the fact of it is, this guy does make contact. He is a good, he takes good at bats. He's not going to swing at balls. He's got to make contact. But again, I don't think he's never going to be a star-studded hitter. But this guy definitely won't hurt you in the lineup when he's pitching or when he's in the outfield. He's not going to hurt you. He's going to do his job. So, I think he's at that point where if he takes a leap, it's not going to be huge. But I've definitely seen him in free. So I think he's broken his record every week since he's joined. And he's up in the 90s now, or at least near it. So he's never going to be a bat first guy, but definitely a guy who will give you good at bats and won't hurt you when he's in the lineup.
Yeah, I think a good comparison for him, and this is going back a couple years now, but I think a prime Nathan Sandler is a good comparison. Nathan was a guy with a great eye who, when he put the bat on the ball, is hardline drives and hit for a little bit more power than you expected him to. And I think Tyler Hall is very similar. And Nathan Sandler in his prime was a very good hitter. I think Tyler Hall could be a very good hitter for this Dalton team. And let's go ahead and talk about another good hitter for this Dalton team in Jack Roberts. And this is a guy who last year was one of the talks of the BBN. I would say, he was probably top 5 or 10 in of how many times the guy got talked about on BBN. Jack Roberts was up there. He was kind of the story of the season. And then this year he comes out a little bit of a slow start. He hasn't really been putting up monster numbers, but I think over the past couple months, he's been kind of getting better and better and better. But I think Jack Roberts, he's still a great hitter. And if you look at what he's done, again, over the past 2 months, he's been up there with the top of Dalton, but I think nobody's really been talking about him because of that slow start. And I think Jack kind of got screwed up a little bit by his high school team. Sometimes when guys go to their high school coaches, they get them swinging soft and trying to get out of their approach, not trying to do damage at the plate. And I think Jack really got screwed up a little bit by that experience. And then when he came back, he had a really slow May and June. So I think he's kind of been starting to find it again. And I think you're going to see him over the next 2 months to end the season. I think he's going to be a monster to end the season. So that's kind of been my prediction for Jack. I've been impressed by him. putting in the work to kind of overcome the step back he took. And I think he's going to have a monster last 2 months. And I hope he takes kind of a lesson from this season and goes into his high school season next year and really stays within his approach, because I think he could have a monster year next year and be, an MVP caliber player. But let's go ahead and talk about Sam Dollar Bills Dollins, a guy who I think we've all liked a lot over the course of his career, both on the pitching and hitting side. But Bernie, this is a guy who I think is still trying to find his way. He's in that limbo, kind of like we talked about with Lucas Wilburn earlier in the show. He's in that kind of limbo where does he want to be a bottom player on Dalton or a top player on the second team on Burn? He's kind of in that limbo right now. And this is a guy who I think has got top team star potential, and it's just about what can he do to break into that team. So, Bernie, what are your thoughts on Sam Dollins right now, and where do you see his career kind of taking course over the next year?
Yeah, I'm big Sam Dollins fan. Like you said, he's kind of been the odd man out for to make the Dalton roster all year. But you look at his burn stats. I mean, he is the superstar of that team. He is, I think, this is my personal opinion, he's the best player on that team. And on the mound so far this fall, he's looked, dominant. He's been the ace of that burn squad by a mile. And with the bat, I think it's just finding consistency. I think all the tools are there, the power's there, just being consistent with it. And like you said, where's he going to play on Dalton is another big question, because you have Vince Dalton playing first, and then that's his prime position. I know he can play third base, he can move around a little bit, but you have like Santiago Story who plays third base. I know Sam can play the outfield, but again, their outfield's also very good. So just looking for a spot for him. And I think if he gets his shot at a starting spot, I don't think he'll lose it, because I'm a big Sam Dollins believer.
Yeah, I think, again, it's very similar to Lucas Wilbur, who was the best player on Bell for 3 or 4 months before he finally got his shot back with Floyd. And when he came back up, he had to earn a spot. He had to take somebody's job, and he did it. He came in, took somebody's job, and has taken it and held with it. And I think Sam's still looking for that opportunity to take somebody's job. And I think he should go and sit the bench with Dalton and find an opportunity that way. Because, it's just one of those things that it's always going to be hanging over his head. It's always going to be, oh, yeah, Sam's sitting great, but it's on the second team, so it doesn't really count. I think he's got to go back up to Dalton, sit the bench, take his lumps, and eventually he's going to get an opportunity to take somebody's job. And I think that's the path he's got to take to get that opportunity and then ride with it. But I like this kid a lot. He's got all the tools, and I think it's just one of those things where he's got nothing left to prove on the Burn team. He's proved everything there has to be proven. He's proved he can pitch. He's proved he can hit. He's proved he can be the superstar. And I think the next step for him is to prove he can take somebody's job on that Dalton team. Let's go ahead and move on to 18U, and this is a more interesting conversation because obviously these guys, there is no long-term kind of trajectory. It's what they are right now, and really a lot of these guys, all three of these guys we're talking about are in the last year of their club careers. So let's go ahead and talk about Brady Heck to start. This is a guy who, has kind of taken a weird path in his career. He was, started off as a hitting prospect, and then he kind of turned into a pitcher and really got involved with pitching, and then became a big pitching prospect. He was a guy who we thought was going to be a top of the rotation type arm, and then he gets hurt, and now he's kind of going back to hitting. So he's taken a weird path in his career, but I think he's had a very nice offensive season. He was one of those guys who was a switch hitter when he joined, and now we've kind of gotten to focus on one side of the plate. And since he's made that transition, since he's gone from being a switch hitter and being mediocre from both sides to just focusing on, okay, I'm going to be a left-handed hitter and dominate, he's really had a nice little season. He hit his first career home run, a couple weeks ago. And I think he's been a guy who, as this 18 Floyd team has been looking for guys to step up around Brennan and Mac, I think Brady Heck's done a nice job. He's always had a very good eye at the plate. He's always made a lot of contact. It's about, like Kendi's talked about all show, how hard is that contact going to be? And I think he started to make some really hard contact. So I like Brady Heck. I think he adds something to this 18 Floyd team. And I've been impressed, to say the least, from this guy so far. Another guy who's kind of been, I say we talk about this guy a little bit on BBN before, but a guy who definitely has not been in the spotlight necessarily, and that's Clayton Kayera, who has had a very nice year at times. He's had weekends where he's been the home run leader on this team, and I think finally right now, he started to be don't have to worry about getting taken out of the lineup type hitter. But KJ, for Clayton, you know, as he kind of transitions from that prospect into role player into now, I feel like he's a pretty, pretty situated starter at this point. What do you think about Clayton Keira's season, and where do you see him going forward in the next year?
Yeah, Clayton's a guy who once, he's always been a very, very hard worker. And once he did start having success from that hard work, he still kept working hard. And that's something, we see a lot. These guys work so hard and then they get good and then they kind of take their foot off the gas and fall back. But Clayton's a guy who just keeps going ahead. He keeps working hard and keeps moving ahead. So, when we talk about guys to fit, around this lineup of the core too of Mac and Brennan, I think Clayton slides right in. You get a couple hitters like Ronick and Clayton, and like we just talked about Brady Heck. You can surround that lineup with some good players. Get guys on base for Mac and Brennan. Get guys who can hit after Mac and Brennan. So, for Clayton, he's a guy who's going to play. He's not going to have the center field job obviously with Mac out there, but he's a reliable corner outfielder. He's not afraid to lay out. He's not afraid to run through a wall for the team. He's a team everything guy. And he's really bought into the approach and a guy you really cheer to succeed.
Yeah, I think he's been a great story all year long, and I'm excited to see what he does now that he's just an established guy in the lineup, and we'll see how it goes for him the rest of the season. But the last guy we want to talk about here, again, it's one of those guys who is known for his pitching, but has secretly, kind of silently put together a very nice offensive season, and that's Elliot Myers. And I'll tell you what, when we were preparing for the show and I pulled up this guy's numbers, they are a lot better than I kind of thought. Elliott's always been one of those guys who's going to hit for a low average, but, has that power potential and is a guy that's going to, every once in a while just hit a bomb. But Elliott is hitting over 300. He's been a guy who in his career has been closer to 250. He's hitting, with an OPS over 900. And I think he's had a very solid season so far. 2 home runs, 3 doubles. I think it's been nice to see Elliott, who, had that hand injury in the middle of the season that kind of derailed him, but he's put together a very nice offensive season. And Bernie, we all know what Elliott does on the mound, but what have you thought of his hitting season so far this year?
Yeah, it's kind of very similar to Tyler Hall here. They're at this point in the career where they're going to both be pitchers first, probably. But Elliott's put a very nice season. Him and Tyler are completely different type of hitters, though. Elliott's gonna go up there. There's some balls Elliott hits. Like we've seen Elliott hit home runs, but he hit this foul ball grand slam. I think it was over the summer that would have cleared the fence by 75 feet. So the power is definitely there. His free swing record's got to be in the high 90s, if not breaking 100. It's just being consistent, being able to lay off speed in the dirt, be able to not chase high fastballs, be able to find his pitch in the zone. If he can do that, I mean, the power's there.
Yeah, and the strikeout rate is still high for him. He's been a guy that has always had kind of strikeout problems, and the strikeout rate's still high, but he's doing a lot more this year with the balls that he is making contact with. His strikeout rate last year to this year is about the same, but this year he's putting a better production because he's doing more on those balls that he's making contact with. And I think if he can get that strikeout rate down, if he can lay off that fastball at his eyes, if he can lay off that curveball in the dirt and start giving himself more opportunities of good pitches to hit, I could see him being a superstar with Mac and Brennan. He's got the power. He's got the pure power, the same as those two guys. So I could see him putting together a very nice end of the fall and also, last kind of summer for his career. But that's going to do it for this episode of the BBN After Dark. It is Labor Day this weekend, so there are no games, so we're going to have to decide what we're going to talk about next week as well. But I thought this was a great episode to kind of talk about some guys who are not necessarily always in the spotlight, and a lot of guys on this list who I think are future superstars in the Bears. So, KJ, Birdie, thank you again for joining me here on BBN After Dark. We'll talk to everybody again on Friday for the regular BBN episode, but thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to y'all next time.